The screen door of the small frame house had not been latched right since the funeral. It hung a half-inch off the jamb, and every time the Arkansas wind came across the cotton field, it would tap, soft, against the wood. Tap, pause, tap, like something asking to be let in, or asking not to be forgotten. It was a Tuesday morning in May, 1944. The town was called Dyess. The colony was a stretch of flat, dark, government-given land in the Mississippi River Delta, with houses set out in straight lines, each on its 20 acres of cotton. The cash house was number 266, white paint, tin roof, a porch with 2 steps, a pump out back. And inside, on that morning, the smell of coffee and biscuits, and something heavier that had not lifted from the room since the day they brought Jack home from the school shop. 8 days. That was how long Jack Cash had lain in the back room before he passed. 8 days of his father standing in the doorway and his mother kneeling by the bed. 8 days of a boy named Jack, 14 years old, opened from hip to ribs by a table saw, talking about a river he could see, and angels singing on the far side of it, and a beautiful place his mother and his little brother could not yet see. The little brother was J.R. He was 12. He went by his initials because his parents had not given him a name, just letters, just J and R. The story would change later, depending on who told it, but on that morning he was J.R., and he was the boy who had walked his brother to the schoolhouse the day of the accident, and who had been told by Jack, gently, that he should go fishing instead. "Go on, J.R. You don't need to come with me today. I'll see you tonight." He had gone fishing. He had not seen him tonight. Jack had died the week before. They had buried him in the small Dyess cemetery on a morning when the cotton was already waist-high in the fields. The neighbors had come. The Baptist preacher had spoken. The dirt had gone down on the small pine box, and Ray Cash had stood there with his hat in his hand and his jaw locked tight, and he had not cried. Carrie Cash, J.R.'s mother, had cried enough for both of them. She had cried, and then she had stopped, because she had 4 other children to feed, and a house to keep, and a husband who did not know what to do with his sorrow except let it turn. That was the thing about Ray Cash. The sorrow did not soften him. It hardened him. He had not been a tender man before. He had worked too many fields, lost too many crops, walked too many miles looking for work in the long, thin years of the 1930s, when the river took the bottomland and the bank took the rest. He had a way of looking at his sons that made them stand straighter without knowing why. He had a way of speaking that left no room. And in the days since Jack's death, that way had not loosened. It had narrowed. It had sharpened. It had taken on a quietness that frightened a boy more than yelling. J.R. came into the kitchen that morning in clean overalls, his hair still damp from the basin out back. His mother was at the stove. His sisters were in the front room. His father was at the table with a cup of coffee in front of him and the Bible open beside it, not reading, just open, as if its presence was meant to keep something at bay. J.R. sat down across from him. He did not speak first. He never spoke first. He had learned that. He waited for the cue, the nod, the look that said, "You may now exist in this room." He waited the way a small animal waits at the edge of a clearing, eyes only, body still. His father stirred his coffee with a slow turn of the spoon. Then he set the spoon down on the saucer, and he looked at his youngest boy across the table, and he said the sentence that would walk with J.R. Cash for the next 59 years of his life. There was no warning. There was no preamble. There was just the kitchen and the screen door tapping against the jamb, and the cotton standing quiet outside. and a father looking at a son. And what he said next was not even loud. "Too bad," Ray Cash said. "It wasn't you." The boy did not move. Some children, when they are hit with a sentence like that, run. Some cry. Some fight back. J.R. did none of those things. He sat with his hands flat on either side of his plate, and he looked at his father's face. And he did the only thing his body knew how to do in that moment. He kept very still, the way he had kept still by Jack's band, the way he had kept still at the graveside, the way a boy keeps still when he understands, on some animal level deeper than language, that any movement now might break the world further than it has already broken. In the front room, his mother stopped moving. That was the other sound he would remember, not the words, the silence that fell behind them, the pause of a woman who had heard her husband through the thin wall, and who now had to decide in the space of one breath whether to go in there or stay where she was. Carrie Cash stayed where she was. She closed her eyes. She put one hand on the door frame and the other against her chest, and she stood there with her face turned away from the kitchen, and she did the only thing she had left to do for her boy in that moment. She prayed. She did not pray out loud. She did not pray in sentences. She prayed the way mothers pray when their child has been struck by something they cannot lift off him. A long, wordless reaching, a holding, a standing in the gap. Inside the kitchen, J.R. waited. He waited for his father to take it back. He was 12 years old, and he still believed that grown men could take things back. He waited for the apology that would come in the form of a hand on his shoulder, or a sentence that said, "Son, I did not mean that. I am only tired. I am only heartbroken." The apology did not come. Ray Cash sat there, and he drank his coffee, and he looked at the open Bible on the table, and he did not look back at his son. That was the second wound. The silence after. The silence that said, "I meant it." The silence that said, "You will carry this, and I will not help you carry it." But something had been said, and both of them knew it. After a long time, J.R. stood up. He picked up his plate, though he had not eaten anything on it. He carried it to the sink. He set it down softly. He did not look at his mother in the doorway. He did not look at his father at the table. He walked through the front room, past his sisters who were pretending not to have heard, past the radio that was not on, past the small wooden cross his mother had hung on the wall above the front door, and he opened the screen door, and he stepped out onto the porch. The cotton stretched away in every direction. A boy can look at cotton for a long time without seeing it. He can look at the rows, the green tops, the brown earth between them, and not see any of it, because what he is really looking at is the sentence his father just said. He is turning it over. He is testing it the way a tongue tests a broken tooth. He is asking, in some place far below thought, whether it is true. Too bad it wasn't you. He sat down on the top step. He put his elbows on his knees. He folded his hands. He was 12 years old, and he did what his mother had taught him to do when the world became too heavy. He began to pray. He did not pray to be loved. He had been raised better than to ask God for things that were not God's to give. He prayed instead the only prayer he could find inside himself that morning. He prayed for Jack. He prayed that the beautiful place Jack had spoken about on the 8th day was real. He prayed that the angels Jack had heard had carried him gently. He prayed that the river Jack had seen was wide and clean, and that the far side of it was full of light. And then, because he was his mother's son, he prayed for his father. He prayed that whatever had broken in Ray Cash on the morning Jack came home from the school shop would one day be mended. He did not ask for the sentence to be unsaid. He was not foolish. He knew that some things, once spoken, cannot be unspoken. But he prayed that the man who had said it would someday find his way back to the table without that sentence sitting between them. He stayed on the porch for a long time. The wind came across the field. The screen door behind him tapped against the jamb, once, twice. His mother did not come out. He understood, even then, that she could not, that she would have to decide later, in private, what to do with what she had heard. What the audience would not know, decades later, when a tall man in black stood on stages from Folsom to Madison Square Garden and sang in a low, broken voice about prisons and prodigals and rivers. What they would not know was that the man on the stage was still, in some private chamber of himself, the 12-year-old boy on the porch in Dyess, still listening for the apology that did not come, still holding the sentence in his hands like a stone he could not put down. He would spend the next 59 years trying to put it down. He would try with music. He would try with women. He would try with whiskey. He would try with pills, by the thousand, by the handful, in hotel rooms from Memphis to Los Angeles. He would try with prison concerts and Bible studies and long, dark drives through the Tennessee night. He would try, eventually, with a woman named June Carter, who would one day stand in a doorway and refuse to leave. But on this morning, in May of 1944, none of that had happened yet. On this morning, there was only a boy on a porch and a sentence in his ear, and a mother praying in another room, and a father at a kitchen table who had not yet learned that grief, when it is not laid down, becomes a weapon a man uses against his own. After a while, J.R. felt a hand on the back of his neck. It was not his father's hand. He knew the weight of his father's hand, and this was not it. It was Carrie Cash. She had come out onto the porch without him hearing her, the way mothers do, and she had sat down beside him on the top step, and she had put her hand there at the base of his neck where a boy's hair meets his collar, and she had left it there. She did not say what she had heard. She did not have to. She said only one thing, and she said it low, the way she sang in church, the way she hummed over the wash basin, the way she had spoken to Jack on the 8th day when she told him it was all right to go. "J.R.," she said, "your daddy is not God." He turned and looked at her. "Your daddy is not God," she said again. "And what your daddy says about you is not what God says about you. Do you hear me, son?" He nodded. He could not yet speak. "There is a place in this world for you," she said. "I do not know where it is. I do not know what it looks like, but it is out there, and the Lord knows the road to it, and we are going to walk you toward it, one step at a time, for as long as I am breathing. Do you hear me?" He nodded again. She did not promise him that his father would change. She was too honest a woman for that. She did not promise him that the sentence would lose its weight. She knew better. She had been married long enough to a hard man to know that some words, once spoken in a kitchen, stay in the kitchen forever, and that every time a boy comes back into that kitchen, even as a grown man, he will hear them again. What she promised him instead was simpler. She promised that the sentence was not the only voice in the room. She told him that morning, in her own words, that there were two voices speaking over him in this life. There was the voice at the table that said, "Too bad it wasn't you." And there was another voice, a quieter one, a voice that had been speaking over him since before he was born and would still be speaking over him long after the man at the table was in the ground. A voice that called him by his name, even though his parents had only given him letters. A voice that said, "I see you, son. I made you. You are mine." She told him to listen for that voice, to listen for it in the cotton and in the river, and in the songs his Aunt Nixie sang on the radio, and in the Carter family on Saturday nights, and in the long Arkansas evenings when the sun went down behind the field. To listen for it when his father was hard, to listen for it when he was alone, to listen for it most of all when he was not sure he deserved to be listened for. He sat with her on the porch for a long time after that. The screen door did not tap. The wind had gone still. Somewhere down the road a dog barked once and then stopped. A neighbor's truck passed slowly on the dirt and lifted a thin trail of dust that hung in the air after it was gone. Inside the house, his father did not call him back. His father did not come to the door. His father stayed at the kitchen table with his coffee gone cold and his Bible still open, and he did not say another word that morning. There was no apology that day. There was no apology the next day. There was no apology, in fact, for many years, and when it finally came, it would come in such a small, half-shaped way that only a son who had been waiting his whole life for it would even recognize it as one. But on the porch that morning, J.R. Cash was not waiting yet. On the porch that morning, he was learning something else. He was learning what it cost to stay in a house where you had been told you should not have lived. He was learning that there is a kind of love that does not fix what is broken, but sits beside it on the step and keeps its hand on your neck and tells you to listen for the other voice. He was learning, without the words for it, that he would spend his life listening for that other voice, and that sometimes he would lose the sound of it, and sometimes he would find it again, and that this losing and finding would be the long, slow shape of the rest of his days. Some words, once spoken, do not leave the room. They walk with the boy who heard them. They sit beside him on porches, and in tour buses, and in prison yards, and in hotel rooms where the curtains are drawn against the morning. They sit beside him in every doorway for the rest of his life. But some hands, once placed on the back of a boy's neck, do not leave either. They walk with him too. He stood up at last. His mother stood up with him. She kept her hand on his neck a moment longer, and then she let it fall, and she went back inside to her stove and her bread and her other children. He stayed on the porch. He looked out across the cotton field one more time before he followed her in. He did not know yet that he would write songs. He did not know yet that there would be a Memphis, a Sun Records, a stage, a woman named June. He did not know yet about the pills, or the prisons, or the long road home. He only knew, on that morning, that he had heard two voices in his father's house, and he knew, even at 12, even with his eyes still red from a week of holding it in, which voice he was going to spend the rest of his life trying to hear.